The first time anyone really noticed Daniel Foster at the office, it wasn't because of his quarterly numbers or his sharp eye for detail. It was because of the baby carrier slung over his shoulder, the one with the faded dinosaur patch and a missing zipper. The elevator doors slid open on the 17th floor, and there he was, balancing a diaper bag, a laptop, and a 6-month-old with a shock of curly hair and a gummy, uncertain smile. The Monday morning crowd, usually glued to their phones or lost in the fog of caffeine, paused. Some stared. Some smiled. A few whispered. Daniel kept his eyes forward, heart pounding, pretending he didn't notice the ripple of attention that followed him down the hall. He hadn't planned on bringing Sophie to work. In fact, he'd spent the entire weekend trying to avoid this exact scenario. But when the sitter called in sick at 6:15 a.m. and his backup sitter's phone went straight to voicemail, Daniel had run out of options. He'd already missed too many days since his wife, Emily, passed away last winter. The HR emails were polite but clear. "We understand your situation, but we need you here." So he packed bottles, diapers, and a change of clothes and prayed that Sophie would sleep through the morning meeting. The office was a glass and steel monument to efficiency, all open spaces and minimalist decor. Daniel's cubicle was tucked in the far corner, near the copy room, a spot he'd chosen for its quiet. Today, it felt like a stage. As he settled Sophie into her portable bassinet, he could feel eyes on him. He tried to focus on his inbox, but every ping of a new email was drowned out by the soft coos and occasional fussing from his daughter. At 9 sharp, the weekly team meeting began. Daniel hesitated at the door, Sophie strapped to his chest in her carrier. He braced himself for the looks, the questions, the judgment. Instead, he was met with a strange silence. His manager, Linda, blinked twice, then smiled tightly. "Glad you could make it, Daniel." And guessed. A few people chuckled. Daniel forced a smile, grateful for the attempt at normalcy. The meeting dragged on, numbers and projections blurring together. Sophie, mercifully, slept. But as Linda clicked to the next slide, a soft whimper rose from the carrier. Daniel rocked gently, hoping no one would notice. The whimper turned into a wail. He fumbled for a pacifier, cheeks burning. Linda paused, her eyes flicking from the screen to Daniel. "Take your time," she said, her voice softer than usual. Daniel nodded, retreating to the back of the room, bouncing Sophie until she quieted.
After the meeting, people approached him in 2s and 3s. Some offered advice. "My sister swears by white noise apps." Others just wanted to peek at Sophie, their faces softening as she gripped their fingers. For the first time since Emily's funeral, Daniel felt something shift. The walls he'd built around himself, the ones made of grief and exhaustion, began to crack. People saw him, not just as the quiet guy in accounting, but as a father, doing his best. By lunchtime, word had spread. Daniel found himself the unlikely center of attention in the break room. Colleagues he barely knew stopped by to say hello, to ask about Sophie, to share stories of their own kids. Someone brought over a spare bottle warmer. Another offered to watch Sophie while Daniel grabbed coffee. He was overwhelmed, but grateful. For months, he'd felt invisible, moving through the world in a haze of loss and responsibility. Now, people were seeing him again. But not everyone was pleased. In the corner, Mark from sales watched with a frown. "This isn't a daycare," he muttered to anyone who would listen. "We all have problems." Daniel heard the whispers, felt the sting of judgment. He tried to ignore it, focusing on Sophie's tiny hand wrapped around his finger. The real test came at 2 p.m., when the CEO, Victoria Lane, made her weekly rounds. Victoria was a legend, sharp, decisive, and famously unapproachable. She swept through the office like a force of nature, her heels clicking a warning on the polished floors. Daniel had only spoken to her once, during his interview 3 years ago. He doubted she even remembered his name. As Victoria approached, the office seemed to hold its breath. She stopped at Daniel's cubicle, her gaze landing on Sophie. For a moment, Daniel thought she might say something about professionalism, about company policy. Instead, she crouched down, her expensive suit creasing at the knees, and smiled at Sophie. "And who is this?" she asked, her voice warmer than anyone expected. Daniel swallowed. "This is my daughter, Sophie. Her sitter canceled last minute. I'm sorry, Victoria held up a hand. "No apologies. She's beautiful." She glanced around, her eyes sharp. "I hope everyone's being helpful." Heads nodded. A few people murmured agreement. Victoria turned back to Daniel. "You're doing a good job, Mr. Foster. Both of you." She stood, smoothing her skirt. "If you need anything, let HR know. Family comes first." The room exhaled. Daniel felt a wave of relief, gratitude, and something else, pride. For the first time in months, he felt like he was doing something right.
The rest of the day passed in a blur. Sophie fussed, napped, and charmed her way through the office. Daniel answered emails one-handed, took calls with Sophie gurgling in the background, and somehow managed to finish his report before the deadline. When he finally packed up to leave, Linda stopped by his desk. "You handled today like a pro," she said. "If you ever need to bring Sophie again, just let me know." Daniel smiled, the weight on his shoulders a little lighter. As he stepped into the elevator, Sophie asleep against his chest, he caught his reflection in the mirrored doors. He looked tired, yes, but also something else, hopeful. Outside, the city was bathed in late afternoon light. Daniel walked to the subway, Sophie's soft breaths a steady rhythm against his heart. He thought about the day, the stares, the whispers, the unexpected kindness. He thought about Victoria Lane, the CEO who had seen him, really seen him, and offered understanding instead of criticism. He realized that sometimes the moments that make us feel most exposed are the ones that connect us to others. That vulnerability isn't weakness, it's the beginning of something new. The next morning, Daniel woke before dawn, Sophie curled beside him in the bed they'd shared since Emily's passing. He watched her tiny chest rise and fall, her fist clutching the edge of his t-shirt. For a moment, he let himself believe that everything would be okay, that he could do this, be both mother and father, provider and comforter, all at once. He moved quietly through the apartment, making coffee, packing Sophie's bag, checking his email for any urgent messages. The memory of yesterday lingered, the way people had smiled at him, the way Victoria Lane had spoken to him like he mattered. It was a strange feeling, being seen. For so long, Daniel had felt invisible, his grief a private shadow that no one could touch. Now he wondered if maybe, just maybe, he could let people in. At the office, things were different. People greeted him by name. Someone had left a box of pastries on his desk with a note, "For you and Sophie. You've got this." He smiled, tucking the note into his pocket. Sophie gurgled in her carrier, waving a chubby hand at anyone who passed by. Linda stopped by mid-morning, her arms full of paperwork. "How's our littlest team member?" she asked, peeking into the carrier. Sophie grinned, drooling on her sleeve. Linda laughed. "She's a natural. You know, I was worried when you brought her in yesterday, but you handled it better than most of us would have." Daniel shrugged, embarrassed. "I didn't have a choice." "None of us do," Linda said softly. "We just do our best." The day passed in a series of small kindnesses. Someone brought Daniel a coffee. Another offered to watch Sophie during a meeting. Even Mark from sales, who'd grumbled the day before, stopped by with a tentative smile. "She's cute," he admitted, awkwardly. "My sister's got twins. I don't know how she does it." Daniel smiled, surprised by the gesture. "You get used to it, or you pretend you do." At lunch, Daniel sat in the break room, Sophie propped in a borrowed high chair. People gathered around, sharing stories about their own kids, their own struggles. For the first time, Daniel felt like part of the group. He listened, laughed, and even shared a story of his own about the time Sophie had managed to cover herself and most of the living room in mashed peas. The room erupted in laughter, the sound warm and genuine. After lunch, Daniel returned to his desk to find an email from Victoria Lane. The subject line was simple, "Checking in." His heart raced as he opened it. "Daniel, I wanted to thank you for your professionalism yesterday. I know it wasn't easy, but you handled it with grace. If you ever need flexibility, please let HR or me know. We value you and your family. Best, Victoria. Daniel stared at the screen, unsure how to respond. He typed, deleted, and retyped his reply half a dozen times before settling on, "Thank you for your understanding. It means more than you know." He hit send, his hands trembling. He wondered if Victoria would even read it or if it would get lost in the sea of messages that filled her inbox every day. But the gesture mattered. It was a lifeline, a reminder that he wasn't alone. The afternoon was quiet. Sophie napped in her carrier while Daniel worked through spreadsheets and emails. He found himself humming softly, the tune of a lullaby Emily used to sing. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of peace. At 4 o'clock, Linda stopped by again. "We're having a team happy hour on Friday," she said. "You should come. Bring Sophie if you need to." Daniel hesitated. He hadn't been to a social event since Emily's funeral. The thought of making small talk, of pretending to be okay, was daunting. But Linda's smile was kind, and the invitation felt genuine. "I'll think about it," he said. "Good," Linda replied. "We'd love to have you."
As the day wound down, Daniel packed up his things, careful not to wake Sophie. He walked to the elevator, feeling lighter than he had in months. Outside, the city was alive with the sounds of evening, honking horns, distant laughter, the hum of possibility. On the subway ride home, Daniel watched Sophie sleep, her head resting against his chest. He thought about the day, the kindness of strangers, the warmth of community, the unexpected support from his boss. He realized that he wasn't just surviving anymore, he was living. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Daniel sat at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of bills that never seemed to shrink. He thought about Emily, about the promises they'd made to each other. He wondered if he was doing enough, if he was being the father Sophie deserved. His phone buzzed, a message from Linda. "Don't forget about Friday, we'll save you a seat." Daniel smiled, tucking the phone into his pocket. He poured himself a cup of tea and sat in the quiet, letting the events of the past 2 days wash over him. He thought about Victoria Lane, about the way she'd crouched down to Sophie's level, about the way she'd spoken to him like an equal. He realized that leadership wasn't about power or authority, it was about empathy, about seeing people for who they are and what they're going through. It was about making space for vulnerability, for humanity. As he drifted off to sleep, Daniel felt a sense of hope he hadn't known in a long time. He knew there would be hard days ahead, days when the grief would feel too heavy, when the bills would pile up, when Sophie would cry and he wouldn't know how to comfort her. But he also knew that he wasn't alone. He had a community, a team, and a CEO who cared. He closed his eyes, Sophie's soft breaths a lullaby in the darkness. Tomorrow would come, with its challenges and its joys, and Daniel would face it, one day at a time. Friday arrived with a nervous flutter in Daniel's chest. He dressed Sophie in her softest onesie, the one with tiny yellow ducks, and packed her favorite blanket. He wore his best shirt, the one Emily had bought him for their last anniversary, and tried to smooth the worry lines from his forehead. The office felt different today, lighter, almost festive. People smiled as he walked in, some waving, others stopping to say hello to Sophie. The sense of belonging was new, and Daniel let himself enjoy it, even as a part of him waited for the other shoe to drop.
The day passed quickly. Daniel finished his work early, double-checking every number, every email, wanting to prove, if only to himself, that he belonged here. Sophie was a hit, as always, charming everyone with her gummy grin and chubby fists. Even Mark from sales, who had once grumbled about professionalism, stopped by with a stuffed giraffe. "For Sophie," he said, awkward but sincere. Daniel accepted it with a smile, feeling the last of his defenses slip away. At 5 o'clock, the team gathered in the lounge, a space usually reserved for quarterly celebrations and company milestones. Today, it was filled with laughter, the clink of glasses and the soft babble of Sophie, who sat on Daniel's lap, wide-eyed and curious. Linda handed Daniel a soda, her eyes twinkling. "You made it," she said. "I'm glad."
Daniel nodded, feeling the warmth of her words. He looked around the room at the people who would become more than colleagues. They were friends, allies, a makeshift family. For the first time since Emily's death, Daniel felt the ache in his chest ease, replaced by something gentler: gratitude. The door opened and a hush fell over the room. Victoria Lane entered, her presence commanding but not intimidating. She wore a simple dress, her hair pulled back, her expression open and kind. She scanned the room, her gaze landing on Daniel and Sophie. A smile broke across her face, genuine and bright. She crossed the room, people parting to let her through. "Mr. Foster," she said, her tone warm. "And Miss Sophie. May I?" Daniel nodded, and Victoria knelt beside him, reaching out a hand. Sophie, ever fearless, grabbed Victoria's finger and giggled. The room relaxed, laughter bubbling up again. Victoria looked at Daniel, her eyes serious. "I wanted to thank you," she said, quietly. "Not just for your work, but for your courage. It's not easy to show up, especially when life is hard. You've reminded all of us what matters." Daniel felt his throat tighten. He managed a nod, words failing him. Victoria stood, addressing the room. "We talk a lot about values here, about teamwork, integrity, family, but it's easy to forget what those words mean until someone shows us. Daniel has shown us. He's shown up for his daughter, for his team, and for this company. That's the kind of leadership we should all aspire to." The room erupted in applause. Daniel felt his cheeks flush, embarrassment and pride warring inside him. Sophie clapped her hands, delighted by the noise. After the applause faded, Victoria leaned in. "If you ever need anything, time off, support, flexibility, you come to me. Understood?" Daniel nodded, overwhelmed. "Thank you," he whispered. Victoria smiled. "You're welcome. And thank you, Sophie, for brightening our week."
The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversation and laughter. Daniel found himself at the center of it all. People sharing stories, offering advice, asking about Sophie. He listened, grateful for the connection, for the sense of community he'd thought he'd lost forever. As the party wound down, Linda approached, her expression thoughtful. "You know, Daniel, I think you've changed this place. People are talking more, helping each other. It's like you gave everyone permission to be real." Daniel smiled, humbled. "I just did what I had to do." "Sometimes that's all it takes," Linda replied. "One person willing to be vulnerable. It makes it safe for the rest of us." Daniel packed up Sophie's things, saying goodbye to his colleagues, accepting hugs and well wishes. As he stepped into the elevator, Sophie asleep in his arms, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in months. Outside, the city was alive with the energy of Friday night. Daniel walked to the subway, the cool air sharp and invigorating. He thought about the week, the fear, the kindness, the unexpected support. He thought about Victoria Lane, about her words, her willingness to see him as more than just an employee. At home, Daniel settled Sophie into her crib, watching her sleep, her tiny hand curled around the stuffed giraffe. He sat in the quiet, the events of the week replaying in his mind. He realized that he wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living, truly living, surrounded by people who cared. He thought about Emily, about the promises they'd made, about the life they'd dreamed of. He knew she would be proud, proud of him, proud of Sophie, proud of the family they'd built, even in her absence. As he drifted off to sleep, Daniel felt a sense of hope for the future. He knew there would be hard days ahead, challenges he couldn't yet imagine. But he also knew that he wasn't alone. He had a community, a team, and a CEO who cared. The next Monday, Daniel arrived at the office to find a new nameplate on his desk: Daniel Foster, Senior Analyst. A note was taped beside it, written in Victoria's elegant script: "For your dedication, resilience, and heart. Congratulations." Daniel smiled, tears prickling at the corners of his eyes. He looked at Sophie, who gurgled happily in her carrier, and felt a surge of pride. He realized that sometimes the moments that make us feel most vulnerable are the ones that connect us to others. That leadership isn't about titles or power, but about empathy, about showing up, about being real. And as he settled into his new role, surrounded by friends, supported by his boss, and anchored by his daughter's love, Daniel knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be.